The Indigenous Curatorial Collective, Collectif des Commissionnaires Autochtones, ICCA, acknowledges that we are recording this podcast on Treaty 4 territory, traditional lands of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. We are honored to have guests from all across Turtle Island, also known as North America. The ICCA is committed to advancing Indigenous arts by advocating for Indigenous-led curatorial practices, fostering critical discourse, building equitable relationships, and creating opportunities for artists and curators through collaboration, education, and community-driven engagement.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Indigenous Narratives in Art, where we explore the vibrant world of Indigenous arts, curatorial practices, and critical discourse. Indigenous Narratives in Art is dedicated to bringing you insightful conversations and thought-provoking content that highlights and amplifies Indigenous perspectives in the arts. We're grateful to Sarah Whalen Len, aka Ink Stitcher, for our beautiful cover art. This podcast is made possible by the generous support of Digital Strategies Cultivate Grant from Canada Council for the Arts and the Listen, Hear Our Voices program from Library and Archives Canada. Together, you help us in our mission to amplify Indigenous voices. And of course, thank you for tuning in today. Now, let's engage in today's meaningful dialogue with this episode's special guest.
Before we begin today's conversation, I want to take a moment to locate myself clearly and transparently. Listening back to the previous podcast, I realized I never actually introduced myself. I never fully articulated my own positionality. And given today's topic, it does feel especially important. So my name is Justine Stillborn, and many of you call me Teeny. I'm the Digital Programs Manager and the Communications Manager at the Indigenous Curatorial Collective. I am Métis of Swampy Cree and mixed European ancestry, primarily Scottish and Romanian. And I'm Indigenous on my father's side. His family comes from Septuagint Cree Nation in Manitoba on Treaty 4. At the same time, I want to be explicit that I do not claim a community, and a community does not claim me due to bureaucratic name changes and archival gaps have made it a little challenging for me to secure the documentation I require to validate that genealogy. But if you do look at pictures of my grandmother, you'll know that those genetics are really, really, really strong. So I share this not to resolve anything publicly, but to be clear about how I approach this work with responsibility, humility, and accountability. My role here is not to adjudicate identity, but to support Indigenous sovereignty in the arts by helping build ethical structures, platforms, and conversations like these. So today's gathering serves two purposes. This episode of Indigenous Narratives in Art features a conversation called the ICCA Publications Partner Roundtable, an annual commitment within our publications program and a deliverable tied to our grant funding. Second is also episode 4 of the ICCA podcast, which allows this dialogue to live publicly as a resource for the field. Our publications program, Decolonizing Arts Publishing, a creative curatorial platform, is a multi-year initiative designed to challenge systemic exclusions of Indigenous writers, curators, and artists that they face in traditional publishing. It prioritizes Indigenous governance, content-based knowledge sharing, and culturally relevant editorial practices across both digital and print platforms. This year's roundtable focuses on identity and accountability in direct response to ongoing revelations of individuals falsely claiming Indigenous identity. The real impacts of this has had across publishing, exhibitions, archives, and communities. Some of the core questions guiding our discussion today will be: how should Indigenous-led organizations respond when identity fraud is uncovered? How do we hold individuals accountable without erasing context or undermining the historical record or archives? And what tools, whether it be editorial, archival, or relational, might help us navigate that responsibility? My hope today is to act less as a traditional moderator and more as a witness and collaborator, allowing our partners to think together out loud. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our guests. I am deeply grateful to be joined by 3 longstanding ICCA partners, all of whom have contributed to the work we do in multiple capacities. We have Lori Beavis, Executive Director of Daphne, an Indigenous artist-run center based in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Lori also served as the co-chair of ICCA's board up until recently. We also have Jason Baerg, Métis artist, curator, educator, and co-founder of the Shushkitew Collective. Jason has contributed numerous texts to ICCA publications and archives and has participated as an ICCA delegate. And Tiffany Shaw, core member of Ociciwan Contemporary Art Centre and a Métis architect, artist, and curator. Tiffany has also served as an ICCA delegate and contributed reflections on that experience. I also want to invite each of you now to introduce yourselves, your role, your organization, and any brief reflections on your relationship to publishing or archiving within Indigenous arts. Lori, we'll start with you.
Ani, Lori Beavis, Indigenous cause, Pemadashka, Chwang, Sheena Gojuanang. My name's Lori Beavis. My source communities are Hiawatha, Rice Lake, actually, Rice Lake, Ontario, Hiawatha First Nation, and Peterborough, Ontario. My maternal family is Cowie, with other family names, Podash and Muskrat, just to name a couple. And it's through my maternal family that I'm a citizen of Hiawatha First Nation. My father's family are Irish settlers, came to that region when that region was opened out in with a treaty, the Rice Lake Purchase in 1818. And I'm the director of Daphne, the only Indigenous artist-run centre in Montreal. Daphne is a contemporary visual arts center, so we exhibit work by artists, sort of at all different stages of their career. We focus on solo exhibitions because we think that even at this point in time, Indigenous people are still not often given the recognition of a solo exhibition. Our exhibitions are longer running just because we're a very small organization with one full-time person. And so that's really important. We have now shown artists from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast as of just this past November, December. And it feels really good. And we've also shown artists from other parts of Turtle Island, specifically Hawaii and Portland, Oregon. I think what's uppermost in my mind at the moment is just thinking about this sort of archiving the project that has become Daphne and how important that is. And I'm sort of working with a couple of different people to sort of see how we actually create an archive. We're also thinking at Daphne about a publication in time to come. So we're still sort of I'm feeling like we're still on the very, very early edges of all of that, but we're really interested to hear what other people have to say today and to join in this conversation. So which.
Thank you, Lori. I think we're all at the beginning, early stages of, what does archiving look like? Jason, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, great. Miko Pisu Napio Nitase Kasun. So I'm Cree Métis from Saskatchewan. My grandmother, she was born in Moon Hills, just outside of Muskeg Cree Nation. My great-grandmother, she was a Moro and a Ladue. And my great-grandfather would have been a Ladue. And so they're registered in the Métis registries. I grew up in Prince Albert. I'm really excited to go back. I fly back Monday. So the Prince Albert Winter Festival turns 50. So I'll be curating the program for the Man Art Gallery, as well as I'll be hosting some workshops for queer Indigenous youth of the North. So I'm really excited to go back to do that. So it's always good to go home. It's always good to do work in Saskatchewan. So I'm excited. I live here now in Toronto. I'm a tenured professor at OCAD University, and I teach in drawing, painting, and Indigenous visual cultures. So when I think about the impact of the archive, I think from early years, when I was back functioning as chair at the Indigenous Curatorial Collective, the archive was really important. And I think as a young academic myself at that time, I really saw the value of that collection of writings on Indigenous art by Indigenous authors. So it's just really great to see that that knowledge bundle has been protected. There was a minute there where we were like, where is it? Like it fell offline. So it's great to see that it's back online. and that it continues to grow. So I'm really happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I want to mention, we used to have, there was the bibliography built in 2007 that curators were worried was lost, but we were able to restore a lot of them through this program, through the digital publications grant. So
important.
And also, I just want to mention too that by the time this episode airs, the Creative Conciliations program will be live, of which, Jason, you have a chapter. So yeah, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I'll turn it over to Tiffany.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation with you all. So my name is Tiffany Shaw. I'm a Métis architect, artist, and curator, as Justine said. And the family I come from is from Fort McMurray. So I was born in Calgary, raised in Edmonton, but my mother and my grandmother were born in Fort McMurray. And my great-grandmother was born in Fort Mackay. So our family line is the Tarajos, and my great-grandmother spoke Slavey and Cree, and she was raised in the bush with the Cardinals. And she was the moccasin maker in Fort McMurray. So I do a lot of my practice is based on the work that she did as a craftswoman. And my biological father is British. I met him in my late 30s, and he passed away shortly after I met him, but he comes from Britain. I thought I was Dutch most of my life, but until I met him, and then I learned that he was actually British. So I'm really glad that I didn't buy any clogs or any of the flags. And so I've connected with that family, which is really nice. They're very lovely and very open. But I mostly was raised by my mom, and I have a really beautiful family. I have 2 children, Jasper and Aurora. And I also look after 4 of my nieces and nephews, who are a little bit older, and help guide them as best I can. The work I do is as a core member with Ociciwan Contemporary Art Collective. It's been together. The organization has been together for 10 years now. So we just had our 10th anniversary, and we're sort of reflecting on what a 10th anniversary show could be. So it's very exciting. And what Ociciwan does is it's located in Edmonton, Alberta, Ociciwan. And what we really try to do is support Indigenous contemporary artists with experimental creative practices, and we also try to really take a view into innovative research with what they're doing. The name Ociciwan, it's like a Plains Cree word for meaning the current or the river. It means the current that comes from there. We're really thinking about past, present, future, because there's been such great work in the province of Alberta in Indigenous art. So we always want to have that idea that we're not the first ones here, we're not the last ones here, we're working within a continuum, and we think that name kind of helps instill that. And we also think it conveys like an energy of engagement with Indigenous contemporary culture, linking those, past, present, future ideologies. So what we really try to do is focus our practice. We had hoped it would be like Edmonton in the north, except it is quite difficult to connect to the north in the resources that we have. So we still really try our very best. It's always like in our viewpoint, but it is mostly all of our activities are focused in Musqueam. So it is a bit tricky to say the north, but it is a desire of ours continually. And we do 3 to 4 exhibitions a year, other kind of public programming as well. We do like online exhibitions. We have like YouTube things, and we try to find a few conduits when we do these projects to share them a little bit more broadly. And in terms of what I do is we are a core membership. So we're a collective run society. And so we have several core members, and we try to help guide the center, but it's really Adrienne Larocque, who is our current director, doing amazing work. We're very excited to see how she continues to move in this world and shape the organization, the center. And so I play a background role in the collective. And yeah, you had asked the question in terms of what do we do in terms of archiving and publishing? So we mostly have like a live document. It's our website. That's really where we put a lot of the work. we have the idea always to do a language project to try and bring more language to each of the exhibitions we've done in the past and moving forward. That's really, again, touches on the resources that we have. We only have like 2.5 FTE positions at all times. So that can be a real struggle. So that means like one staff and one full-time and then 3 part-time often is what that ends up being. And what we're really trying to do now, we've been in the center for 5 years. Because originally when we started, we created relationships with other organizations in the city to exhibit with them while we were trying to figure out if we should have a center. And then once we were able to be bold enough and brave enough to take that next step, we have just celebrated the 5th year signing of our lease with the city of Edmonton. And so we're extended it to another 5 years. And so hopefully we can broaden our scope of resources so that we can be a little bit more engaging with the publications that could come out of Ociciwan in a more substantial way.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on. I wanted to mention episode 3 actually had Adrienne. She wasn't able to join us for this episode, so I'm glad that you were able to, step up as a core member. I also want to mention, as a shameless plug, you had mentioned that you guys want to expand it to North, and August 2027, ICCA is having our gathering in Whitehorse, Yukon. So hopefully you can put that on your calendar and have some Ociciwan core and staff come and join us. But with that being said, we can now start moving into some questions. Now, I want to state that our aim today is not to arrive at like a single policy or a definitive answer. We're just surfacing tensions, sharing some strategies, and identifying where shared principles might already exist or need to be built. All right, so let's jump in. Now, if you want to answer this question, feel free to hot potato it. Over the past few years, how have revelations about false identity claims affected your organization's publishing, curatorial, or archival practices, if at all?
I just think about the opportunity I had last fall to curate Jamie Morse. And she posed a really important question. And just, and it really did, the outcomes of the question was, where are you from? And she asked that in Cree. So the title of the exhibition was in Cree, and it was, where are you from? And it was so beautiful because she told us where she is from, and she introduced us to her family and her ancestors. And I believe, and we wrote a publication. It's just coming to completion now, and I believe that it's going to be uploaded with you at the ICCA. Liz Barron has requested it, which is great. But yeah, Jamie had gotten into a little bit of a scuffle out in community because as Indigenous people, we introduce ourselves, and that's a way for us to understand where people are from. It's not uncommon for us to say, these are my family members, and I grew up in this territory, and that's like how we meet each other. And just by Jamie's initiation into these conversations professionally, it has caused some challenges in Western institutions. So, but nonetheless, she created a really beautiful exhibition, and she wrote an incredible essay about her journey. And literally, it's just kind of being completed this week, so it's very timely. When we're in a collaborative environment and there's one tainted individual, the whole project is at risk of being thrown out. Yeah. And so that's too much labor, and that's too much generosity that gets sacrificed. So I do believe now we're in that time and space where, coming forward with receipts and transparency is vital and important and should just be expected.
Yeah, I agree. I think too, like, there's been some significant, publications, from the 70s, from the 90s, and that have really progressed Indigenous arts in Canada. And if one of them had a pretendian in them, does that make the whole significance of that publication moot? No, it really doesn't. But, my friend always jokes around that we need to bring back public shaming. So
Yeah,
I wish we didn't have to, not say the
I think
names.
accountability isn't necessarily about shaming.
No.
You know what I mean? I think oh my goodness, we are beautiful, dynamic creatures, spirits with a range of emotions. And also I believe the Western paradigm just expects us to be polite all the time. And I don't think that's actually healthy or real. You know what I mean? I think that we should be able to express all of our emotions because they're part of a beautiful spectrum. So I think we need to come forward with respect and hold on to our dignity and our grace as much as possible. But I also feel like that too can be prioritized too much at times, where it does actually stand in the way of us advancing because we don't get to the heart of the matter. Because we're polite and you know what I mean? We're graceful. Whereas, if we just did address things in real time, then we could move forward and we could move forward and we could move forward and we could move forward. So yeah, I do think that gumption should be welcome, that those hard questions and confronting people shouldn't be seen as a bad thing. It's actually out of community safety that we're asking these things really publicly.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lori.
Two things. One, to address first the very first question, the most recent question, which was about how do we go back and look at those previous publications that were published, any 1 or 2 or 3 decades ago. And, that was the reality at the time. I always think about, being a feminist and feminism and sort of going back in time and from this point in 2026, going back and looking at something that was happening in 1926 or 36 or 56 and thinking, how bad that was, but it was the reality of the time as well. And and those were the people who were front and center as well. So there are these interesting articles being written about a range of artists. And so it's just unfortunate that, time has changed so much. You just even think about, I just often think about this photograph that was in a little local newspaper from a little town outside of Peterborough, and it was one of the chiefs from Hiawatha in the 1950s, and he had a plains headdress on, and this is a Mississauga Anishinaabe. There was no, but there's that sort of, it's sort of the people that you knew and the way that you understood indigeneity at the time, right? And so I think we've changed and we're progressing and we continue to progress and we continue to sort of have new and a better understanding about how we talk about art, how we talk about indigeneity, how we talk about ourselves as Indigenous people. So and this is why this conversation I think is so deeply, deeply relevant and prevalent as well. It's a conversation that we just we had we talked about this in June and here we are again in January talking about it. So it's we got to keep talking about it. And then sort of to backtrack a little bit more is Jason talking about the really truly beautiful Jamie Morris exhibition at Sawgal. No, not Saw, 101. And I also think about Joya Khan, the exhibition that opened at the Mackenzie when we were all together for the gathering in Saskatchewan. And, her family were farmers on reserve land, and how her exhibition was about her family and about family history, but it was also about how hard it was to be a farmer who is an Indigenous man, on Indigenous territory, and the deep, deep difficulties that those families had. But she's talking about family, and I think it always comes back. And Jason, you talked about this a little bit at the beginning as well, about your family, and we need to know who we are, and we need to know who we come from. And if we can talk about who we are and where we come from, I think it's really important to be able to ask that question to the people that we're working with. And they have to be able to they have to have a really, truly good, understanding of who they are. And you use these words, Justine, as well, as like, who claims you? And who do you claim and who claims you? And we just have to keep asking that. And, I just think about perfect example is, well, I don't know how perfect it is. Anyway, Sherry Farrell-Rosette always says, just ask them who their grandmother is. That's such a simple question. And it's just essential, because it's also just the disrespect in the way that people who are pretending to be Indigenous people, their identity is constantly shifting. Like they're Haida, they're Métis, they're Anishinaabe from Temiskaming. They're just like grasping at straws all the time. But we just need to be able to sort of like simplify it to a degree. And I just really feel like that those two exhibitions that are just the very, very recent ones about family and about where you situate yourself are just a perfect example and a really, really good starting point as well.
Thank you, Lori.
I think what we could add to this conversation is the sensitivity for people who are still learning about their heritage. I think this is the difficulty in this conversation. It's like there is a real imposter syndrome that a lot of people have when they hear whispers about their family being Native, but not so directly. So it's fearful for them to claim it. It's also fearful for them to look into it, because that means they have to ask their family questions. And a lot of these family members don't want to open the box, because even though there is such a rush of funding and activity and collective learning right now about how we occupy these spaces as Indigenous people, that is so much different than 10, 20, 30 years ago, there is still a fear. And some people can't answer that question about who my grandmother was, which is the work for them to do. And I think that's, you see these careful individuals step into these spaces to try and share that vulnerability. And, you just hope that they have the determination to keep showing up, to give themselves the courage to push further. I remember this experience at the beading conference just before the pandemic in Winnipeg. It was like in February. And I remember people talking about having to learn about beading online or from other like Russian grandmas that share online from YouTube or things like that. And I remember feeling so privileged that my mom showed me how to bead, who she learned from her great grandmother. Like there are these small, like intimate experiences that some of us were able to retain, and not many people can claim that in these spaces because of what colonization has done to our families. So I think I agree with everything that Jason and Lori said about the introduction. And I'm sure we'll talk about the introduction a few times throughout this discussion about why the introduction is important. But I also think the trickiness is those quiet individuals. And I think about, really think about Laura Greer occupying this space so beautifully, because she always claims her entitlement to being Dene and her journey of adoption, and trying to work her way through language as a way to connect, and then goes and visits her family and does these series of recordings. And I think I've really loved witnessing her journey, exploring their connection and identity. And I think also Eli, he does an amazing job in this too. And the way they explore it through video is quite wonderful, because they think about these partnerships or these relations. And I think that there are small tells when people are likely not Indigenous or claiming maybe more than they should. And you can usually find it in the introduction. The grandmother is the good one. Another one is like, you can see how far back they go with names and things like that. So I did forget to mention that I am a Métis Nation of Alberta or Otipinsaguac citizen. And just I apologize for that. But I think it's like not everyone can claim a territory, and that is where it's really tricky. Like my half brother, he does have First Nations blood in him, but we're not quite sure where because his father was taken by a police officer from a sex worker when he was growing up in Ontario, and so we can't quite trace back where the First Nation comes from. So then he refuses to claim the Métis identity because then he gives up any First Nations claim. So it's like really tricky for some people in these spaces that live multiple cultural lives.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Jason?
thank you so much. Yeah, I love that you were able, Tiffany, to name some young artists that are helpful, like moving forward in a good way through their creative process to illustrate to us all what it means to connect. And I think that we're ready for that too. Like, it's really great that we have superstars like Rebecca Belmore up there, like giving everything with such cultural authority. I think that's really vitally important. But I also do think that we could use an artist, that could show us what it means to move forward in a good way. That those artists too should be given those kinds of platforms, So I do think that's really important. I also wanted to respond to like, who claims you? Like Lori brought forward that really important kind of aspect of community. And, it's like the Moros in Muskeg Lake Cree Nation might not claim me, but that doesn't deny who my ancestors are. You know what I mean? So like, but yeah, I'd love to connect with them, but they might not want to connect to me. That doesn't mean that I'm not Native. You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean that there's other people that claim me. So I also think about like how that impacts our journey creatively. Like, Tiffany mentioned an artist who is using the language, to get a deeper understanding of who they are. And I think about Jolene Ricard and how she talks about how the artist, their duty really is to reflect the deep philosophies of their culture. And so I think having access to your languages is vitally important. So yeah, when I think about the Métis identity, it's very complex, and I think like Michif isn't just Michif. It's also Cree in some spaces. It's also Ojibwe. So I think like there's so much to try to come to terms with in community so that people can advance and heal. Like, I think not only are we doing our own healing work, we're healing our families, we're healing communities. So I think that these are really important conversations.
Well, and I think back to like the original question of what is our own spaces, like, the original questions was, have revelations about false identity claims affected our organizational publishing, curatorial, archival practices? We've been in a really fortunate position where we haven't had a lot of encounters. I could say that is because we are nuanced in our approach when we work with people. Like, that introduction is really one of the ways, but it's also how the artist shares that history and the type of work that they're doing. You can see those investigations and those connections very easily in a lot of the work that they do. I think we've all been trained living in this space for a while to have like the itchy feeling or the tingling sensation when something is not quite right. And so you can kind of, I think we're always witnessing, watching, gossiping in these quieter circles. Like, it's a bit tricky to have this conversation out in the open because you don't want to call people out because some things are in transition, or you don't want to create dialogue that creates rifts or difficulties. Like, everyone wants things to be easy, but it's not. We just haven't been able to encounter it in serious allegations yet. It doesn't mean that we won't, but we've just been very fortunate. We've had discrete things happen, of course, but we haven't had to retract any information as of yet. We haven't had to make any specific statements, but we really work within a framework of transparency in the best way possible. So if questions are asked, we always provide information, or we pull our resources together to discuss it. And so while there is no policy in place, there is a framework for us for conversation and investigation. And that's usually our first route. It's a quieter set of questioning with community, is what our approach is. And I think that's when you see other institutions that are non-Indigenous, how they encounter these issues, you can tell that their framework is not as robust. And then they can encounter other issues, but that's perhaps a separate topic.
I think that's a really good thing to think about, though, I think it's similar to the way that we're working at Daphne. I think all of us who work here talk a lot about, and it's very open about what our connection is to, which community we're involved, connected to. We all do work within our communities as well. I think, and similar to one, we haven't had any big problems. We sort of do kind of like background questions, without it being sort of a background check or anything like that. But and specifically asking, there are some people who are a little bit reluctant, maybe resistant to actually sort of people at different ages about where they actually come from. And so it requires just a little bit more of conversation to keep going. But I think that a couple of things recently, not necessarily connected specifically to identity, but and just really starting to want and need and ask people for conversations about what it's like to work with somebody, and because I think we are a very small community, and we need to know and we need to know how we work with somebody in the best possible way, whether this person is a little bit has had a lot of experience of trauma in their lives, and so therefore then the way that they are in the world can be very challenging, and especially when they come into your space, and you need to know that ahead of time. And then it's also good to share that information with the next. I don't want to it's not gossip or anything like that, but it's just super, super helpful. It's even Indigenous suppliers. We just had this amazing conversation last Friday with somebody talking about catering and Indigenous caterers, and just like that, this one gets all of the business, and there's also so it's, you need to have these conversations because you need to be on the same page, I think, and that comes in, and especially as we're sort of like spread from one coast to the other, east to west, west to east, and so we're a small community, but we're spread out very far across, and so it's really good to have conversations about what the people were like and who they are to work with and all that kind of stuff. So and I think it's also a way to sort of enter into a conversation about where they're from and who they are and what they're claiming too. So.
But I think you touched on something really powerful, Lori, when you talked about the caterers, because this really actually goes back to resources. Mm-hmm. And this is why this is so important, because a lot of people are getting funding in these spaces. People want to make sure that money flows through the Native network, like to support ourselves and our families and our communities first. And then when people take up this space unknowingly or knowingly or harmfully, it becomes really upsetting for people because, you know, their family could have received that funding, or they could have received that education or that spotlight to tell their really intimate story that they don't always have the nuance to tell or the resources to tell because they don't have the same kind of positions. So I think you actually just like kind of hit the nail on the head for me in talking about these broader networks where I think what we're really talking about is opportunity, which is connected to resources, whether it be funding or nourishment or babysitting or education or all these things.
I think too that really touches on like the next question was what is the responsibilities of, you know, publishers and editors, and I think resources is a great way of putting it because I think you guys have both answered the question of what are the responsibilities of those resource holders, and it is to ask those questions and start having those conversations. And like you said, Lori, it's not necessarily about gossip, but it is, you know, reaching out to, and I don't want to say like, you know, the word community is kind of, sometimes we think of community as just somebody's First Nations community, but it's also like their arts community or their queer community, reaching out to that person's community, whatever their community looks like, and saying like, hey, you know, just who are they? Where are they from? You know, it doesn't have to be invasive and it doesn't have to cause harm. And I think that harm was also a big theme of what you guys have both discussed. So my next question would be, do you as a whole feel that the sector currently has adequate frameworks for addressing these issues, or are we still largely approaching these on a case-by-case basis?
I would hope we are. I would hope we are. I do think that like the Indigenous arts is an industry and there is competition and there are people that have much more power and authority, you know, and that can have influence. So like I think when we kind of, I think it's important. I am really grateful as well. I just sat on I just adjudicated for core funds for artist-run centers and galleries and museums across these lands. And I think those that are doing really great work are telling both sides of the story. And they're not just leaning into who was the gatekeeper, you know, and whose opinion, you know, is most influential. They're giving opportunities to both to new artists as well. You know, I think Lori brought forward a really important aspect of championing everyone in our community. You know, like some people have gone through more challenges just due to the intersectionality of their identities, you know. Also, yeah, Tiffany mentioned her, you know, mentioned someone who, you know, they're trying to work out where they sit in the circle because, you know, they can't really confirm who their First Nations ancestors exactly are, you know, because of this system. So I think, yeah, it requires us to be more generous, more open, more thoughtful, and to leave room for discursiveness, you know? And I think that makes for richer dialogue and yeah, growth in the community.
Thanks, Jason. I also want to add in there too that, you know, so ICCA, we had an archival project where we digitized somebody who had false allegations, claims against them. And so it kind of rendered the whole project moot. And we reached out to the funder and they said, okay, we understand the situation, but now you have to develop a policy. You have to do something to demonstrate that you're taking actions to ensure that this doesn't happen again, kind of a thing. And we developed identity policy, and I read it and I was like, oh no, Liz, I technically don't qualify then, you know, and I slipped through those gaps personally. And so then I got to, you know, I don't want to say I trauma dumped on my boss, but, you know, I shared with her, I was like, this is all the ways in which I'm Indigenous and I don't have the paperwork. And yeah, it caused a bit of a panic. And so, so while I do think that, you know, I love processes, I love frameworks, I love a one size fits all. Case by case also gives us the opportunity to build relationships and have more conversations where we get to know each other and get to know where we're coming from, not just where we're from.
Well, and growth. Like that's what I'm hearing you say as well. Like there's so much lateral violence in our communities too, like being Native enough, right? So we're not touching on being Native enough because that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I think what I was really hearing about was growth, because we're all at different stages of our identity and our experience and our knowledge, right? So because we're always learning about who we're connected to, and we learn this through like funerals or through weddings, for example, is an easy way. But what we're really trying to figure out is how we sit in this positionality next to our parents or our grandparents or our cousins, and then to the institutions as well. So it starts like on an individual level, and it grows on a local and a global level. And I think when you're saying case by case basis, to me, it really forms that we're really trying to look specifically at the problem rather than applying a broad sweeping solution or policy or framework to everything. We're really being sensitive to the information at the time, because there is a lot of trauma in our communities that can explode a project for numerous reasons that's really connected to like not even the problem at all. So that case by case allows for that gentle nurturing of knowledge, but then also allows for us each to improve our opinions or our identity or our understanding around these conversations in a much more respectful, like Jason had said, and honorable way. And so that those difficult conversations can be held in a really beautiful way rather than a way that destroys us all and then silences a community. Like Buffy St. Marie is such an interesting one to watch, because it really exploded so many communities to open themselves up and interrogate themselves with the awards that they gave her, with the associations that they made. And, it's just like watching people grow up through media in a very critical moment. And yeah, it's like all a learning, and we're learning together. And these more open dialogues help us learn how we can handle the more private ones that are also happening behind closed doors.
Thank you.
We did have I had a really interesting experience. Somebody wrote to me out of the blue. They'd come to the exhibition. They had reconnected. They'd grown up in the southern United States, but reconnected to their community in Manitoba, and so used their sort of their own new knowledge and their distance, because they were then, by the time they wrote to me, they were long moved out of Tiohtià:ke, and but wrote to sort of call out and ask me about a particular artist that we'd shown at Daphne, and this was an artist who's emerging, just connecting back to community. And the person who wrote to me was really vehement, really unhappy that Daphne had shown this person. And so I went back to the artist. I went back to the curator who brought the artist in, and we had a good three-way conversation. But then I wrote to the person who had written the letter to me, and I said, one of the things that we've never done is, you and I never had a chance for me to tell you where I come from and how I come to this job and what I do and how I sort of think about myself as a person who doesn't look like the identity that I sort of share. And so I thought that was, and in the end, actually, it was an exceptionally long letter. And I thought, if nothing else, if they get through my entire letter, they've done a really great thing. Much like my answers to everything here, obviously. But it really actually opened out a really interesting way for us, because then he explained more to me about what a sort of that identity, that Indigenous identity in sort of Texas, Arizona, looks like and sounds like and can be. And then and then me telling him about myself, and then him telling me more about him and how he reconnected to his Ojibwe family in Manitoba. So that was all really just like a really positive and, sort of very sort of grassroots, definitely case by case. I just think that's, we just have to figure out for ourselves how we keep moving forward and do these things in a good way, and do things that are good for the artists that we're showing as well. It's just and I love the idea of gentle nurturing, and because I just think that it's also sort of like diffusing the situation as well, because there is so much anger, because I think sort of when I think we're always, and you may get to this question as well. I think it was one of the things I was thinking about when I read through your script today, Justine, that, I think we're now at a point where we're always like waiting for the next one to come along, and who is it going to, like, not who is it going to be, but waiting for the next pretendian to come along. And just it's fatiguing, and it's also just so demoralizing. And it's also sort of like, I don't feel anger so much as just like actual sadness and betrayal every time it happens as well. And it's just really hard. Like, it's just a really hard. And so we just do need to use, gentleness and care and respect, and to just sort of bring people along, and to sort of help people figure out where it is that they're actually coming from. And then sort of also just to sort of use that for one another as well when the next one comes along, or is revealed. I
hope like we're getting better at asking, the core questions. I'm hoping that we're all a lot more sensitive, so that there aren't these big, Buffy Sainte-Marie moments anymore. I'm hoping we're going to be a lot more aware, so that yeah, we just avoid these kinds of circumstances. I think about Indigenous visual cultures at OCAD, and I think it's really important that educational environments also don't just look at students like they're clients. I think, like, yeah, you're a student and you're in Indigenous visual cultures, but we have a responsibility to community to make sure that, those Indigenous students that are in our classrooms that are generously sharing are not being pirated off of, so, like, yeah, I'm just hoping that we're getting to that place where we're all much more sensitive, and if we are in spaces that we can help shape community, that we're really looking to safety to make sure that happens in a good way. So yeah, I'm hoping we don't have any other big giants coming out as exploiters, aka pretendians in the future. I think it is our call to action to make sure that doesn't happen.
Until I started working for Indigenous organizations, I didn't even know pretendianism was a thing. I grew up learning, I honestly, I was taught to, deny that you're Indigenous, pretend that you're not. My sister was telling me a story. She went to one of my dad's Christmas dinner parties, and somebody was calling him Suzuki, and he never corrected them because they thought he looked like David Suzuki. And he was like, well, if I can just, hide my indigeneity, or, avoid any sort of, I don't know what the word would be, ostracizing, this is the safe way for me to do it. So, but then to have people go and pretend that they are, when I was told to not be, it's mind-boggling in a lot of ways. So my next question would be, do we see any pressures, whether it's legal, institutional, reputational, that tend to silence or stall these conversations when we are asking people where they're from? And I don't want to say how Indigenous you are, but, like, are you Indigenous?
I think right to privacy does, within institutional frameworks, does, like, I have experienced that space where anyways, I won't go too deep, but they were working for a major arts institution. And they were like, well, I don't have to tell you who my family is. I don't have to tell you, where I'm from because of the Privacy Act. And it's like, well, that's great, but
red flag.
yeah, major red flag, but you still have your job and you're still influencing a lot of things that you shouldn't be having access to. So yeah, there's an example, like the right to privacy, but I think, yeah, but
Yeah, that's a big one. Thank you.
Within our community, I think that we have to say, well, we're taking this meeting outside of the institution. We're all going for lunch and we're going to, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. We have to find ways to like circumvent, the institutions, and institutions also need to change. I think like, and that's a major institution that person works for. I think there should be policy and, policy overhauls that support, healthy Indigenous advancement. So, yeah.
I think that like working in the arts, we're in the best position to be the leaders in those policy framework changes, especially because we can go for lunch and we can take our work hats off. And, there's I would say in the arts more than any other industry, there's a blurring between professional and personal relationships because we just do get to know each other at a more intimate level. And so it becomes easier for us to ask these questions. Yeah, that was a rant that really had nothing to do with anything. Lori, I have a question specifically for you. Working within a multilingual urban context like Jajage, have questions of verification, accountability, or community responsibility surfaced in your work at all?
Mostly just the one that I touched on, and just I think if we think about the cross country, cross territories, how small our visual arts community is, the visual arts community of French speaking Indigenous people is even smaller, and so but also tighter, I think, and so I think I think there's a sort of a level of protection there that it's also because it's a strange, this is, I hope I'm not going to get in trouble by saying this, but it's like Quebec is a strange place to operate in. It's like there's, the official line is that there's no racism. There's, Indigenous people have always been accepted and been able to help build the province and things like that. And it's like really not like that at all. And also, and then of course the choices in terms of French and English, historical alignments between one colonizer or another have had a huge impact on people, which language of the two official languages they speak. And then also that's also to the detriment of Indigenous languages. And then it's also to the detriment of the fact that people, somebody from Ganawagi can't speak to somebody at Wendake because they don't speak the same language. They don't speak the other's language, and they've made basically political choices to do that. We haven't specifically had any issues, and we just use this as an opportunity to just like sort of continue and start conversations with one another, just to sort of like keep us all in a good place.
Thank you, Lori. That's a great segue into the question I have for Jason, which is, we're talking about space and geography, but what does that look like when we start entering into a digital realm? And so, Jason, my question is, as someone working across digital platforms, do you feel speed, reach, and permanence complicate accountability when some of these issues emerge?
I think about Tapwewin so much, the truth. Like, I pray for Tapwewin all the time because, like, yes, to answer your question, I actually think digital platforms can monumentalize your words because they're permanent, and you have to be held accountable because they're recorded and they're published, and anyone can anyone has access to them now very easily from the comfort of their home or on their cell phone, wherever they are. There is content available, because it's published online. And so like, yeah, I think I actually think that Tapwewen, or the truth, like, is something I want to embody more than ever because of digital publication. So I think to answer your question, it actually puts the weight on the author or the speaker of their digital content, because now there's access, and it's free and it's out there, so in a way that's really good, and hopefully that will speed up the transmission of knowledges and healing and growth and new directions and Indigenous futurities. But I believe there's a new responsibility on us, a new kind of consciousness that's required. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. And I think it's really reflective of if we start integrating Indigenous knowledge systems and perspectives into things.
Like when I think about that,
Go ahead.
When I think about that, or when I respond to that, I also believe, like, if it's medicine, everybody should have it. You know what I mean? Like, I know it's different people have different ideas. But I think, like, our ways of being, when I think about custodianship, I think the most powerful we can be is actually influential. And I'm really grateful to have experienced, Australia, and how, the local custodians there acknowledge everyone as their citizens. And they're telling their sacred stories to all of the kindergarten children. And they acknowledge all of those kindergarten children as an extension of their nation, because they're on those lands. You know what I mean? So like, I'm sure not all Indigenous people feel the same way I do. I think there's different complexities in different nations where, of course, their intellectual property has to be protected. But yeah, I think if it truly is a medicine, then everyone should have it. So.
I love that. Thank you. I love the idea of little kindergartners being celebrated like that. Tiffany, my question for you then is, how do relational and community-based ways of knowing challenge Western ideas of relationship, verification, or fixed identity? Or sorry, not relationship.
You're going to ask me about how do relational and community-based Métis ways of knowing challenge Western ideas of authorship, verification, or fixed identity. I think Quebec is such a great example of Métis politics, where they use small m, big M. That's really fun to watch how people try to claim Métis citizenship or Métis authorship because they're mixed blood. There's still really a lot of misinformation about what allows you to be in this Métis space and what you can claim. And I'm sure that's for many communities, because some people aren't attached to treaties. And so they are on lands that have been taken away from them, that they have no negotiational powers with governments to enable the resources that they need. So I think, as a Métis person, I always have to acknowledge that we are not the first people here on this land for time and millennia. Like, I have to extend to First Nations relations and honor those deep histories and those kinships and connections. But I also think that I feel a complication of, I think sometimes Métis people play into the Western world too much, because we are of that world as well, and almost like give it away. I've been in so many meetings professionally where I try to make things easier for both sides. And I sometimes love when the communities I'm with refuse to tell people the truth because they have to seek it in other ways. Like the work shouldn't be digestible. And so whereas I'm trying to like make it work between both because I see both worlds and I can see what the problem is, but just because I see it doesn't mean that it needs to be solved in that way. So I do find like I try to be careful in the authorship because it doesn't mean that just because I understand the world that it is my world. And a lot of the ways that I try to reinforce that is I do research in my community to understand what is my claim, what is my history, what is my territory, so that when I'm working with other communities, I'm not trying to claim theirs. And I find that it can be a slippery slope if you're not careful. So I also find that land is such an interesting conversation. Like if we talk about Ociciwan, we really felt very vulnerable to this idea of opening up a center. We didn't know if we could do it. We didn't feel like we had the right resources to do it. But once we were going and figuring it out and found a building and got funding through the city of Edmonton to modernize the building that we occupied, and reskin it and make it the way that we needed to have it, that was when we really started to understand the gravity of having a space that's just ours. And when we were working with Indigenous artists, we really saw they would often say that this is a different space. It feels different working with an Indigenous institution than a non-Indigenous institution. So that was really important for us to understand that having space, taking up space, leads the way for others to do that as well. And we weren't the solution. We're not the solution for all Indigenous artists in the province. And so then they strike out their own organizations, like by us forming, it helps them form their own thing too, which is great because we can't be something for everyone. And that authorship that we take, we try to share. But it is really an idea of ownership also falls onto who owns the land. Like a lot of Western institutions or a lot of Western governments or just people in the Western world think that that you have to own the land. And like our family has a trap line in my history, and it's a shared land. It's with Crown land, and we can have a building on that site, and we can trap on that site, but it's not ours. And we can steward it for a while, but people have a really hard time understanding that the land is shared and it's not ours and the title is not ours. And that's a really I've just encountered that so often that when we talk about authorship, people think, and I think it's a capitalistic view, that like when I buy this item like land or this cup or get married, that these people are our property, or that this cup is my property, even though it came from like the ground and the earth and I share this land with this clay. So I think authorship like is a bit broader. I know we're talking about publications, but I think because we're like, Jason talked about truth, but I think I'm talking about Ociciwan, which is like, all of our relations are kinship. And I think authorship touches on that. And being Métis helps me understand the slippery slope of both being in both worlds, like two-eyed seeing. But whose claim to have anything that's theirs as property is a very strange thing, a very strange notion.
That's all very relevant. Thank you.
And I do feel like it does loop back to the medicines that we were speaking to, because the medicines grow from the land.
Yes, and Mother Nature provided it for us. So like who decides to pick it? And I just find that so, and it has to be nuanced again. It has to be by location, by which community, and how you learn those things. And like I don't learn where my territorial medicines are. So I pick medicine here, but I have protocols here that I follow. So it's interesting.
But it's also that's interesting though, because of course it's always coming, it's through sharing, right? It's one, sharing the medicines, is sharing the knowledge about the medicines, and is sharing the space as well. And so it's really I love everything that you just said. Thank you so much. I also just thought that should be the episode, the theme of the next conversation as well, if this goes on anymore, because like space is such an issue, and claiming this space was, problematic, and we got in trouble when we moved from our little tiny starter home to this much larger space as well. And also then I will say that, when, and this is again a little veering off, but when we were able to bring, Liz Barron from the Curatorial Collective and all of the different people from each of the artist-run centers across Indigenous artist-run centers across the country to Daphne in April of 2024, it was so great because, one, we were in a space that was separated from the public, but it was just a moment of recognition of one another, and sort of recognition of one another, but a recognition of us having this shared space, and then just the conversations that happened, and it just like the 2.5 days just wasn't enough, really. But it just, that the knowledge that came out of it, and the sort of generosity as well, was just also so great, and just the learning was immense and wonderful.
Thank you, Lori. Sorry. So we're almost out of time. So I wanted to propose one last question to everyone before we close out. And what would you guys want to see for future editors, curators, and archivists to inherit from this moment, from this conversation?
I think it's like to believe in yourself when you're working on these things. Like if you have a suspicion, you can talk to many people to find the answer. Like you don't have to do the work on your own. This work can be shared. And when you're encountering difficult conversations, like trust that you will be held, like work in the space of abundance. And that trust that these solutions can be found, and maybe even a better solution will be provided through these things. So if you suspect something is happening, you can address it, and you can first whisper it, and then people can help share it, and then it can get louder, and then you can decide what is the right method of practice to make sure that you're honorable. And then also to make sure you do the work in your own community, like to understand your own connection to your own community, like be vulnerable. Because I think sometimes this, I think one time I was asked to provide membership and by an individual, and I was like, I have told you my history. Why are you asking this thing? Like it felt like lateral violence, but I should really just chill. Like it showed an insecurity in me that maybe I hadn't really uncovered some things for myself. So, try and feel, I'm only saying this because I have to tell it to myself, like try to believe in yourself, try to listen to yourself, and then it can be shared with others. So you don't have to carry it on your own.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks. That's lovely. Everything you said was just perfect. And just also I think it's knowing what's in ourselves as well, and knowing our own history. And I similarly just constantly sort of check and recheck myself, and remember what I know about myself and about my grandmother, and all of the things and all the time that we spent, at Hiawatha and all of that. So I think that's just really important. And I just think that we just carry that all forward. And Peter Morin's the one who always talks about doing things in a good way. And I just always carry that with from Peter as well, as that just, I care, I'm invested, and I have a responsibility to, the generations who aren't with us anymore, and just sort of to make sure that we, I think often about whenever I open an exhibition, I always think about my grandmother. It's like she would just be floored, to think about me being in this space that is completely and utterly dedicated to contemporary Indigenous art. She wouldn't have known anything about Indigenous art, but nevertheless, just the fact that, one, I've made, this my job, and then also, that we get to talk about these people. I get to take my baby kids now, grandchildren to the powwow this year. It's like all of those things it's all still within us, and we've got this responsibility both backwards and forwards in time. And I just feel that's it's a responsibility, but it's also a really, really good thing for us to be doing. And I just have to go back to what Jason said at the very beginning about protecting the knowledge bundles. And that's just, that all comes back to that as well. And so thanks for those words, Jason. I will absolutely admit that I may yet use them in another place. So
be the title of your next exhibition.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, I love these engagements. So I want to say thank you to the ICCA. I just also really appreciated spending time with you all. And yeah, Tiffany and Lori, you both articulated that it starts with us, that we have to do our work. And I too really do believe that I'm accountable to my community. I have to know who I am. I also think about the work I need to do so that I have something to give those students that I'm working with, or those other collaborators, or those community members that I'm presenting art to. That I come forward in, like you said, Peter Morin's words, a good way. Yeah, and I think to answer your question too, Justine, I think when I'm working with other artists, if I'm curating a program and it's under an Indigenous context, I'm not being, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I need receipts. I need to know who you say you are. So I'm going to be very direct. And that's just out of protection for you, because I'm doing that with all of the other artists too, so it's a level of responsibility to the greater community that I'm asking these questions. And I also loved how Lori had kind of articulated how she redirected an energy by like going into her own story via email with an artist, you know what I mean? So I think we can find moments to make it meaningful and to develop deeper kinship relationships with those we're engaging with. So yeah. Tinigi, thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you, all of you, for your generosity and your honesty in these conversations. I know that this dialogue will inform a lot of our practices going forward, but also I have to say that I feel very seen by a lot of the things that we've talked about today. So thank you from a personal level. We're also deeply grateful for your partnership, your labor, and your trust through the Digital Publications Program. To our listeners, thank you for spending time with us today. We invite you all to continue engaging with ICCA's publications and programming, and to sit with the complexity rather than rushing towards certainty. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Indigenous Narratives in Art. This concludes our episode. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and gained new insights into the vibrant world of Indigenous arts and culture. This podcast is made possible by the generous support of Digital Strategies Cultivate Grant from Canada Council for the Arts and the Listen, Hear Our Voices program from Library and Archives Canada. Thank you, both of you, again, for helping us amplify Indigenous voices.
You can amplify your own artistic narratives by contributing your voice to our publications platform and our archive. Visit our website at icca.art to learn more about our programs such as annual gatherings, delegations initiative, and publications, and projects like Community Cares, our curatorial mentorship program, Activations of Solidarity, and more. Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Vimeo to stay updated on our latest episodes and initiatives. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to sharing more with you next time.